Hello and welcome back to the Geeks Review. I'm Royce.
I'm Matt.
And that's Holly.
For those at home, Holly is sneezing.
Oh, sorry, I'm Holly.
No, I'm Aaron.
And we are continuing our discussion from last week's show. Going into movie musicals, last week we discussed Guys and Dolls as well as The King and I. And continuing on, we are going to go into the newer musicals of the newer, more recent decades.
Yeah, so last week we went basically from the golden age of the 40s to the 60s, and musicals that I really like are from the 70s onwards. I think the two from the 70s that possibly, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think two musical movies from the 70s that had the biggest impacts were the Rocky Horror Picture Show and Grease.
Which I have seen.
Yeah. And I have strange relationships with both of these films. I find some of the messages pretty awkward. In Grease, actually, I'm not so bad with Rocky Horror. I understand, like Rocky Horror, I was reading something recently about how, while Rocky Horror is pretty...
Horrible.
Yeah, I don't want to say a certain word, but there is...
Inappropriate.
No, I don't like all the trans stuff and all the discussion of sex. That stuff's all great. It's a very sex-positive film, except there's a scene that foregoes consent, and it's played funny. Like, that Dr. Frankenfurter.
What a funny guy.
Up to his shenanigans.
Up to
Yeah.
his-
So Rocky Horror was... Both of these films actually quite revolutionary for being rock movie musicals discussing sex so openly. Rocky Horror, a bit more explicit, obviously. Yes. So Rocky Horror was originally a stage show. They both were. It actually premiered in England in a very small theatre, and it was 3 hours long without an interval.
Wow.
Yeah.
Bloody hell.
And that was just the Rocky Horror Show at that point. And it was written by Richard O'Brien.
You know him as Riff Raff from that film.
He plays Riff Raff in the film. He sings Time Warp.
A classic example of an actor writing for himself.
Yeah. But Richard O'Brien, very gender fluid person, always showing up in corsets and pearl necklaces just wherever he went. Or maybe
And
he
a
was in
bald
a...
head.
Yeah, maybe he was in a suit one day. He just didn't care.
Just being an absolute legend, basically.
Very, very, very impressive. And so quite amazing that it got adapted into a film. And it's a cult classic now. Like, people go to screenings of it just to dress up and stuff. The film Rocky Horror Picture Show stars the legendary Tim Curry as Dr. Frankenfurter. And obviously he's incredible. And it's a very strange story that I'm not really going to explain, but it involves
How can you?
It involves aliens and trans people and sex and murder.
And Meatloaf.
And Meatloaf. Meatloaf is in it.
Meatloaf's
Yes.
there, because he can be.
It was a landmark, very important film for people in the 70s struggling with their own gender identity, because there was no material like that really allowed anyone who wasn't cis straight. There was no material that allowed them to relate to it and see themselves represented. I mean, obviously he was a villain, but I mean,
it's not perfect, but
he
it
was
was
likable.
representation for, trans people and people struggling with gender identity and people
Yeah.
struggling with their sexuality.
yeah.
It shows that it happened all the way back in the 70s.
Yeah.
And even it's always been happening.
Yeah, it's always been happening, and so it's important. Nowadays, like, I had not seen it, and I actually went to see the live show with Craig McLachlan from Neighbours, who... It later turned out that he was
A bit iffy.
terrible behind the scenes.
Yes.
Abusing his cast members. But
Did he play Frankenfurter?
he did.
Yes.
And
We're
he
gonna
was...
we're
he
gonna
was
legally add an allegedly to that just because it still is alleged.
Yes.
There hasn't been anything going
The
through.
worst part is he was fantastic in the role. But I saw that scene and I saw that show, and it made me really uncomfortable, and I couldn't quite tell why. It was just really strange. And only as I've gotten older have I really learned to appreciate what it was for its time. And you look on it now, and it was pretty left wing when it came out, but you look at it now as a modern left wing person and think, ooh.
Well, steps had to be taken to
They
get to
did.
where we are today.
They did, and there's a thing, like, it's all well and good to look back on art from the past and judge it with today's standards, but also remember that it was made in the past and how important it was then. Don't just not do that. Don't give everything a free pass, because then we don't learn from our mistakes. But yeah. And the other landmark movie musical about sex from the 70s was Grease, starring John Travolta and Olivia Newton-John.
A goddess.
This picks up, correct me if I'm wrong, Holly, but did those two get famous from this film, or were they put in the film because they were famous?
John Travolta was in Saturday Night
John
Fever.
Travolta had already done quite a lot of stuff, but Olivia Newton-John wasn't as famous in the States. She'd done quite a bit of stuff here, but it was really her first foray. And my favourite thing about that is that she couldn't do a convincing enough American accent, despite the original character being American. So they just changed it to that she was from Australia, because why not?
Oh, did they?
Yeah, every
Yeah.
role she's done, she's got the Australian accent.
And then the next film, they're like, oh, her British cousin, because that's how Australians work.
Right.
Yeah.
We're not going to talk about that. That's a bad film. That's a
But-
bad film.
Michelle Pfeiffer,
though.
yeah. Wow.
This is so they changed the character of Sandy to fit their lead actor, and John Travolta playing Danny Zuko. What's the first song you think of when I say Grease?
You're the one that I want at the end.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
sorry.
that's not what I wanted you to
What's
say.
another one that you think of?
Oh, no, Grease Lightning.
Yes,
That's the
what
one.
I wanted
That's
you
the
to
one,
say.
yes.
Danny
I was tricking you. Yes.
Danny doesn't sing Greased Lightning in the stage show.
Right.
It's the best friend, Kaniki, who sings that. But it's the most iconic song from the show, and John Travolta wanted to sing it. So much like Marlon Brando being shoved into a role and having it changed to fit him to a lesser extent, but it's the same trend of
Is it that egregious? Like, does it not make sense within the context of that character? Or
Well,
does
it's
it...
No,
fine
it's-
with the changes that they made, but it was meant to be Kaniki's song, and sorry to say, John Travolta was a little bitch. He whined and complained about not having this solo, despite him singing every single other song in the show.
And it's annoying because he's actually a good singer.
Yeah, that's why
Like,
it's so frustrating. And the guy who plays Kaniki, he agreed to the role because he knew he'd get to play Grease Lightning.
Oh,
And so he doesn't even sing in the show, I don't think, at all. I
Oh,
think he
no.
sings in the finale. But yeah, it's just because John Travolta was like, I want to sing the solo. You're not allowed a solo. I'm a big star. I'm going to quit if you don't give me the solo.
Yeah.
Every musical theatre person ever.
Yeah. Just a comment on musicals as a whole. I would mention that these musicals are rock musicals, but really it was the 70s where rock started to actually be accepted as acceptable storytelling music for musical theatre. Like, musical theatre from like the 40s to the 60s started to develop its own kind of music. Like, you could say it's jazz, but it's not really.
It's a jazz derivative.
It's musical theatre music,
Yeah.
that Rodgers and Hammerstein style. So it's quite revolutionary when they start making, radio playable songs to tell stories.
Oh, yeah, they are very radio playable.
Yeah, Time Warp, Grease Lightning, You're the One That I Want.
Yeah.
Amazing songs in their own right. A lot of people wouldn't even know they're from musicals. They
I mean,
just know
even
them as
now,
songs.
any disco that we went to as kids, if we remember back when schools did discos, you'd always hear the Grease Megamix.
Yeah.
It starts off the dun 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 dun. Why, it's Grease Lightning! We all remember that.
Grease Lightning.
Yeah. And like most kids don't even know where that came from, but we all still heard it.
And just briefly, I want to touch on. Obviously, we can't talk about musicals without talking about Andrew Lloyd Webber. And so in the theatre scene, he had written by this point he'd written Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, and then the smash hit Jesus Christ Superstar, which did get a film version in the 70s. Aaron probably would know more about it, to speak more about it than I do, but it's a very experimental film in a way.
Jesus Christ Superstar as a musical is experimental.
This is true. It's a rock opera. There's no
Yeah.
spoken dialogue.
The
None
film
at
is
all.
fun though.
Oh, it's a lot of fun. Like, Ted Neely playing Jesus is amazing singer, but he's not as much of a strong actor. He got better as an actor later on in his career, where he kept playing Jesus up into his bloody 70s,
Yeah.
even though Jesus died when he was 30.
Semantics.
But I think the standout of that movie, though, would be the guy that played Judas.
Yeah.
Yes, Carl.
I feel terrible. We meme about it all the time.
We do, but he's amazing. He's this black dude who sings and plays the role of Judas, and he is absolutely incredible. Incredible belter,
But that
rock singer.
That movie's so much fun though because it just grabs the setting of Nazareth and it grabs
They're
the
just-
setting of
They're just
where
in
they
a
are
desert.
Yeah,
in the desert, but they're all in 70s gear.
The
and it's
I-
all the bell bottoms and the
yeah.
big hair.
Or like the idea of Jesus Christ Superstar is like, what if Jesus came today? Like, how would he be treated? So you've got all this element of like the media, and he's a superstar, that kind of thing. So the setting is very strange. Like on the one hand, you got Jesus in robes, he's out in the desert, but Judas is wearing a tasseled bell-bottom red jumpsuit as he sings.
That's Carl
Heaven on
Anderson,
Them.
the singer.
Anderson.
Yep.
Carl
Carl
Anderson.
Oh,
Yeah.
good old Carl Anderson.
Yeah.
He's great.
Rest in peace.
Yeah, but then you've got really weird costumes, like the high priests have like Mad Max fetish gear and papal hats.
And
forgot
then
about
you've
that.
got bloody King Herod,
Yeah.
who's just wearing pretty much nothing but like a Speedo in
Yeah.
a swimming pool. And he's got this huge afro.
Yeah,
It's very odd, but very fun.
Very experimental.
Godspell's exactly the same. The film version.
It's the
of
70s.
Godspell.
Oh man, wow, yeah.
70s.
yeah,
If you've seen the film version of Godspell, it's just like they did too much of the bad stuff, and they got
They
very
made-
involved.
They made Jesus look like an actual clown,
Yeah.
wearing like big boots and
So you move from the 70s into the 80s, and there's not a whole lot of movie musicals from the 80s.
They started dropping off around the
Yeah,
80s.
my favorite from the 80s is Little Shop of Horrors, which is an 80s, which this is interesting. It's one of the first times you see a musical being adapted from a movie.
yeah.
So, as you were going to talk later about the producers,
Yes, very briefly.
Little Shop of Horrors was a black and white 1960 dark comedy by Roger Corman, Jack Nicholson's first film role. He's in there for like 2 minutes. But they always advertise that film now with
Little
Jack
Shop of
Nicholson.
Horrors with Jack Nicholson.
That's
it's like,
right. Yes,
oh,
I've heard
where?
about this. Yes.
Morbid film.
Yeah. And then that was adapted, that 1960 movie was adapted into a stage musical in 1980 and then adapted into a 1986 movie with Rick Moranis as Seymour. Steve Martin's in it as well.
And Bill Murray.
Yeah, Bill Murray plays the Jack Nicholson character.
Because sure.
But I love that film. It's another instance of a celebrity being put, like an actor being put into a musical role. Rick Moranis
Rick
doesn't.
Moranis works well because like Seymour's supposed to be that kind of.
He's the character.
Yeah.
His singing is a bit, like that's kind of.
Well, like all his songs are also put down
Yeah, they
some
are.
tones
But
as
he
well.
does a beautiful job.
His acting carries him through.
Yeah.
But he is fantastic. They have rock singer Levi Stubbs from the Four Tops do the voice of Audrey 2, the carnivorous
Yes.
plant.
Oh yeah.
He's
good.
incredible. They added a new song for him, Mean Green Mother from Outer Space. That was incredible. Steve Martin, a comedian, he plays the psychotic dentist. His singing, it's not that important. Not that important that he's a great singer, but he does a good job.
Broadway actress plays
Audrey Green, she wasn't the original.
Yeah.
I don't think she was.
I thought they brought her in.
Oh dear.
Hold on, let's search it.
I'm just gonna Google it.
Gotta look this up.
Obviously she's incredible. It's interesting often, and this is a problem in musicals oftentimes, that the comical character who doesn't have to sing very well, and there's a few of them, can be men, but if a woman's in a musical, she's got to be a good singer,
Yeah.
which is kind of a shame.
Then you've also got like the three, the fourth wall breaking singers.
What are they called? They've got a name.
They're just called the Girls.
the
the
girls?
girls.
Yeah. The three very Motown inspired.
Yeah.
I just want to mention an interesting evolution. We were talking about diegetics before. Chicago, which came out in the 90s, I think.
Late 90s, early
Yeah,
2000s.
Chicago, really interesting. It was a new way of kind of dealing with the songs and being diegetic and stuff. It comes from a stage show, but the stage show is just like, it's a musical. Like when the character feels too much to speak, they just start singing. But in the movie, all the acting scenes, when it comes to a song, it cuts to a fantasy performance. So suddenly they're in this theater and everyone's in incredible glowing costumes and stuff, and they're singing to the theater and it's a performance. But that singing world never meshes with the acting world. it's really interesting. It's
The best example of that is We Both Reached for the Gun, where the main character is puppeting his girl who killed her husband or partner or whatever, and he's actually puppeting her. It's like a ventriloquist show, and so you cut between them doing an actual interview outside and her actually talking to the press, and then him in this fantasy theaterscape with her on a ventriloquist dummy on his knee, making her talk and puppeteering everyone else who's one of the journalists.
Flowing from the 90s into the noughties in the year 2005. Talking about Andrew Lloyd Webber musicals, not long after Jesus Christ Superstar, he then made pretty much the longest running Broadway musical ever, Phantom of the Opera. And of course, eventually they were going to make a movie adaptation, because that's just what you do with these sorts of things. They probably got the worst director to do it.
Joel Schumacher.
Joel Schumacher, yeah. So as in
He's an interesting director.
yeah, he's an interesting guy in general. But this movie isn't shot as if it's a musical at all. He has no idea how to shoot a musical, because I think this was his first musical that he shot, ever. And it just shows how little he knew about how musicals worked. All the camera angles just don't work. There's the scene between Meg and Christine, talking about the Angel of Music. There's just a long shot of them walking down a hallway and the camera is just above them. You don't get these moments of actual communication between these characters, because the camera is doing something that it wouldn't normally do.
It's like we were in the theater and we saw them that far away. Now we're watching the movie. Give us a
And we're
close up.
seeing them, yeah. Still seeing them that far away.
And Phantom ties into what I was saying last week with Guys and Dolls, the casting errors.
Yes. Yes. The biggest issue everyone seems to have with this film is casting Leonidas himself, Jared Butler, as Phantom.
Not a big singing person.
He's not a singer at all. He obviously got as much training as he could for his ability that he had.
He did his
and it
best.
showed. I don't think maybe Music of the Night was taken down a bit. I'm not sure. I think he did sing everything in the key they were in, but every time he has to hit a high note, it's just he's just screaming it. So there's no control in his voice. Some people say it just sounds like he's been gargling rocks. His voice is so rough.
Bonnie Tyler?
And yeah. And oh God, it's
I love his acting in that film.
his acting is brilliant. Jared Butler's a great actor.
He does his best.
And, you can almost see him as a seductive, mysterious person. But the main issue with it though is that in the stage version, literally he is fully deformed. Half his face is deformed. He's got bits of his skull revealed on his head. He's very whenever you see any version on stage, his makeup is insanely deformed. But he kind of just looks like Prince Zuko.
It's oh
The
no,
Last
poor baby
Airbender.
has a scar.
He has
Oh,
a little
dear.
burn mark on his over his left, and that's it. It's oh wow, he's so terrifying. Oh my God! But it's no, it's just Jared Butler with a slight, burn mark.
He's so, I hate to say this, but he's so sexy that it doesn't even matter, because he's just Jared Butler handsome on one side and then Zuko on the other. And as we know from Avatar, no one cares because Zuko is still attractive.
Well, I'm not gonna lie. When I first watched it, because this is the first version of Phantom I ever watched.
Same.
So
Oh,
I
dear.
didn't hate it, because I'm oh yeah, I didn't know the music that well enough to be oh, this is the way it's supposed to be sung. So I enjoyed Jared Butler's performance. But then you see every other version on stage and you're that's what it is. And, they even did this weird thing where in parts that were supposed to be sung, they just speak them for some reason. The stuff
Because
between...
Joel Schumacher doesn't know musicals.
the best part about the movie is definitely Patrick Wilson as Raoul.
Yeah.
Who
Night Owl
is-
himself.
Who is a Broadway actor and performer.
Broadway veteran at this
Broadway
point.
veteran,
yeah.
yeah. He's done a bunch of stuff and he's a singer.
Right, wow.
And, him and Emmy Rossum are doing their thing. But then
She's so cute.
she's adorable. her voice doesn't suit the character of Christine Daae. She's supposed to be up there with the soprano best. That's like, they compare her to Carlotta, if not better than Carlotta as a singer.
Who is like the best soprano in the country.
Who, actually, Minnie Driver, also very good.
Yes.
But, yeah, like, the moments of speaking when it's supposed to be sung doesn't work because some of the lines are rhymed.
Yes.
Ooh.
You know, it's like,
So it
look
just
at
sounds
this,
like
a
beat
secret
poetry.
engagement. Look, your future bride. But why is it secret? What have we to hide?
Yeah, it's
And it
cringe.
becomes like this cringy Dr. Seuss
And then
thing.
sometimes they don't have the music under it either, and they're just saying it, and there's nothing.
Exactly. And the biggest atrocity is the masquerade sequence.
Oh God.
You know, this is supposed to be the beginning of Act 2, right? And big, extravagant, bright costumes, a lot of colour. What are people wearing? Black and white.
Oh.
And gold.
Oh, and gold.
Oh, sorry, and gold. Yep, can't forget
The
that.
coolest thing is the Phantom's reveal, which is a big dolly zoom.
Oh, the Dutch angles.
The Dutch angles.
There's lots of Dutch angles in this
Dutch
film.
angles and dolly
Phantom
zooms.
takes his mask off. Dutch angle.
But it's like he relies on the Dutch angles to get across what he could get across if he actually put effort into it.
And
Hot take.
if they just gave the Phantom the Red Death costume, like, properly.
Yeah, I've seen that on stage. It looks phenomenal.
It's like big hat, skull mask, whereas he's
I
just got
will
like this
say-
half mask.
They did do the boat scene very well.
Yes.
The sewers and the boat looked great. And his lair looks great.
And this is another interesting discussion about diegetics and stuff that's
Yeah.
actually happening, because when the Phantom, because when Christine first sees the Phantom, he appears in the mirror and she's like, whoa, and then he like reaches through the mirror and pulls her into the mirror, and they're going through this golden tunnel, and there's these hands on the walls holding candelabras, and they move out of the way for him to come down. And then she comes down, there's a horse in the sewers, and then there's a gondola, and then candles that are already lit rise out of the water. And it's all very fantastical while he's singing. Christine and the Phantom are singing Phantom of the Opera, which, you know, it's a great sequence. I love it. But then Christine's friend, when she goes missing, goes into the dressing room and sees that the mirror slides apart, and then goes into the same corridor, and it's dark and dingy, and there's no arms on the wall. So it's like, did the Phantom drug her, or was it just non-diegetic?
Yeah, it was like she was so
arms?
taken aback by him that, you know, she almost entered this fantasy world.
The answer
Yeah.
is that he drugged her.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
But that's,
Ooh,
that's
yeah.
not clear in the film.
Or you just hire a bunch of homeless people and get them to spray paint their arms gold.
Just
Yeah.
snaking their arms around, just like, oh, those poor homeless people who have to pull the candles out from the water. Suddenly they're going, is he here?
Yeah.
Is he here?
I'm
What?
getting cholera down here.
I guess to kind of just cap it off is that, like, a Phantom of the Opera movie should work. I think it, you know, it works better on stage, obviously, but if you did it properly with the right performers and, you know, the proper cinematography like you would any other modern musical, you know, it's,
Do what you did to Rent
yeah.
with Phantom of the Opera.
Oh, Rent's not that great a film.
But it's shot very
Oh,
well.
yeah. Like, we're not saying comparing, like, the film itself, but, like, the...
The
techniques.
cinematography of something like Rent, where they actually put a lot of effort into translating it, because it would be really hard to translate what's basically a bare set musical into this new one. If you put the amount of effort that they put into something like Rent or something like Mamma Mia into something like Phantom of the Opera, you'd have a good show.
And a lot of these movie musicals need to start hiring more Broadway performers.
Make new
Unless you
stars,
can
yeah.
find an actual, like, actor that can sing.
Meryl Streep.
Oh, yeah. Like, it just then takes away from the performance because then you're just watching the actor try their best at singing.
Well, it feels like they're just so scared to take a risk on a musical that they have to hire a big name celebrity. And then when the big name celebrity butchers it, they're like, right, well, we know movie musicals don't do well. And it's like,
Mamma Mia.
But it's...
But that did well, and so they were shocked.
Yes. Yeah, I just did want to tap into the producers, which same deal as Little Shop of Horrors. It did that kind of movie to musical to movie musical. And it was directed by Susan Strootman, who was also the theatre director, who shot it very much like it was a stage play, very wide angles, very got to capture the entire set in the frame as well as the actors. But the producer's, Mel Brooks. And it has some of the most catchy songs. And the one that's been stuck in my head for months now, Springtime for Germany. Fantastic song, but I don't think I could sing it out loud. But you
Springtime for Redacted and Germany.
Sung by John Barrowman.
Oh, John Barrowman.
I mean, at the time, he was making his debut as Captain Jack Harkness on Doctor Who.
And he
Fantastic.
was a blonde.
That was the same time.
It was
He
the
was
exact
a
same time.
blonde.
Yeah.
That was weird.
That was weird to see when I first saw it. I'm like, wow, okay.
Who?
Well,
But-
they also had, because they had Nathan Lane and Matthew Broderick, who just done the stage version
Yes.
as well.
Yeah.
So
And Uma Thurman absolutely killing it.
I have actually watched very recently Curb Your Enthusiasm, Larry David sitcom, the guy who made Seinfeld along with Jerry Seinfeld. And I think in season 4, he gets chosen to play Max Bialystock, who is Nathan Lane's character, and David Schwimmer is playing Matthew Broderick's character. And I can't... The entire series is them working on the stage play, working towards getting on, and there you do have a lovely Nathan Lane cameo. But it's funny to see, and there is an alternate universe where that happened, where Larry David was Max on Broadway.
Yeah.
But yeah, lots of catchy songs, and it grabbed me and pulled me in at a time where I was still getting around to just watching movie musicals and becoming accustomed to them, where I sort of gone my entire life avoiding them. It grabbed me and yanked me in and got me engaged, and that's what you need.
I can understand why a lot of people find musicals impenetrable. I was kind of born into a musical family, so I love them from the start. But I can understand why the idea of watching a story that gets interrupted, people can see it as a story getting interrupted by a song and dance, and that can annoy some people. I talked a few weeks ago about The Greatest Showman. Story is often interrupted,
Yes.
so there can be a pop song. But yes, a good musical, the songs will move the story.
And the audience.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Well, does that wrap up this week's episode of the Geeks Review?
I hope so. Thank you for listening to this very long two-parter. We'll be back next week. Tune in for that. I'm Royce,
I'm Matt.
I'm Holly.
And I'm Aaron.
and we'll see you next week.